This is why I sometimes think if the whole world simultaneously turned off Twitter, Facebook, and the news, like, I think we'd have a whole lot of peace very, very quickly.
Welcome to the show that the fact checkers warned you about. The one that debunks the mainstream narrative and gives you high signal, actionable content that helps you navigate the cloud world. It's Bomb Thrower TV with your host, Mark Jeftovic.
So we're rolling. Anyway, we can start whenever you want. Are we on your show or are you on my show?
I believe I'm on your show.
Oh, well,
yeah.
Welcome to Bomb Thrower TV.
Beautiful. Glad to be here.
I noticed I never even knew you had a podcast. So I just subscribed to it the other day and I'm like, okay, these are pretty good. You're usually doing like 90-minute segments, aren't you?
Yeah, so I started about 2 years ago. The listenership has gone down recently, honestly, and I think that's just a function of the bear market. Just, people sort of tapered off a little bit. Like in 2021, the podcast was really rocking. I was getting 20, 30, 40,000 listens to the show.
Right.
And yeah, it's tapered off big time. I think probably 70% down from there. But yeah, I'm gonna get it up to episode 100, which is 3 more episodes, and then I'm gonna just leave it for a little bit. I kind of need to, I probably made the mistake of not monetizing it earlier, which is what I should have done.
Right.
So it's basically a drag on my time, fucking around editing this and that for no real upside, and I just want to kind of spend a little bit more time just writing and actually looking for a project to work on where I can actually sink my teeth into something that is not purely just content related.
Interesting. So what kind of project are you looking for?
Ideally a Bitcoin project. I'm sort of scanning what's happening with mining in South America, or southern South America to be precise. So sort of around the Paraguay region. There's some interesting stuff happening with I spoke to some guys doing basically methane extraction from landfills and using that methane to run Bitcoin miners, where the power is basically next to free. But on top of that, they're getting fucking carbon credits too. So they're scamming the damn government, which is fantastic. So
that's similar to what Great American Mining and I think Cathedra is going to do or was doing. They used to be and then they've kind of gone their own way. But that was off of natural gas wellheads, oil wells. You're talking about this is coming off of landfill.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't know this, but apparently, when landfills are built, so there's landfills and there's tips. Tips are where they just dump everything. Landfills, they actually, at least the more modern ones, they build them in such a way that the methane that is produced from the landfill is sort of channeled, and you can extract it and use it, basically.
And
which I didn't know about.
Credits.
Yes.
Which are worth more than an FTT token these days.
Apparently. Not that they should be, but
I mean, they're both just kind of minting stuff out of thin air and ascribing a value to it.
Well, I mean, literally in this case, they're pumping methane out of the ground, so thin air, and they're ascribing a value to it. It's fucking madness, honestly.
Do you see this climate cult, this climate hysteria? Do you think it's something that's crescendoing right now, or do you think it gets it gets worse before it gets better, or it's already peaked? What's your sense on that?
No, we're early days, man. I mean, there's good, pushback. There's the Aleks Epsteins of the world, and there's a lot of stuff. Good content coming out, like from Bitcoiners, from conservatives, and all that sort of stuff that are pushing back on, the climate hysteria. And I think the monkeys at the World Economic Forum, etc., don't do themselves any favors. But I think we're all sort of in our bubble a little bit. And when I kind of step out of that bubble, when I've jumped on Instagram here and there and see my old normie friends, like they still believe in climate change, and they still think that, you know, we're damaging the world somehow and all this sort of stuff. And it's yeah, I think there's still quite a bit of momentum behind that. And it's just a function of, like, I mean, my generation grew up like with a whole thinking around that. Particularly in Australia, I remember, you know, we had all the, you know, the cleanup days and all that sort of stuff, which, to be honest, is good. Like, you know, I don't want people to get me wrong. I think that you know, keeping your environment clean is important. Like, I'm here in Eastern Europe at the moment, and people here are completely fucking uneducated about that stuff. Like, to keep themselves warm in the winter, they just burn whatever they have on hand, and they burn garbage most of the time, and the whole place smells like shit, man. It's fucking disgusting. Like, you just smell plastic.
Hmm.
And you know, so you know, there is a you know, there is a moral duty to maintain cleanliness and look after your environment and all that sort of stuff. But as you say, there's a, you know, the climate hysteria is a completely different thing, and the problem is that line's not clear, um, particularly with you know, millennials and younger. And you know, I'd probably say I'm part of the older millennial crew, so I'm sort of in my mid 30s now.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up with one foot out of the digital realm and one foot in. I think the ones that are a little bit younger than me, they've never, you know, they never got dirt under their fingernails. So they're unlikely to appreciate, you know, the proof of work or the stuff that goes on in the background in order to enable their quality of life. And they'll be most susceptible to climate hysteria. And that's now the generation that's coming into wealth, basically, is, you know, my generation. So it's, yeah, it's a long way of saying I don't think we're at crescendo yet. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I think, to your point, that there's this lack of differentiation between pollution and climate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, like, who's going to argue against cleaning up the environment in terms of pollutants? I guess the problem
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is carbon is defined as a pollutant when it's
Mm-hmm.
really just a natural life cycle part of the ecosystem. Same with nitrogen and even
Totally.
methane, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. I was agreeing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then, but, you know, the problem with climate hysteria is people are divorced from the costs of it. And this is why sometimes I wonder if maybe it's starting to peak now, because the imbalances that were introduced, I mean, you could argue when they all started, but let's say the COVID crisis really put a lot of this stuff into like a precarious, like, phase transition of just things hitting their breaking point. So the cost, I call it the true cost of wokeness, right? They're finding out what that is in Europe. You're in Europe this winter, right, where people are burning stuff to stay warm. You know, to your point about burning garbage, they're also not where you are, but in some places, I can't remember which country specifically, they're chopping down old growth forests here in Canada on the West Coast. They're running them across the country by rail. They're grinding them up into pellets on the East Coast. They're shipping them by tankers over to Europe, and then they're burning them for heat. And that's being called biomass and green energy, right? And that's possibly the most destructive, environmentally destructive way to heat your house that you can think
Morons.
of.
Yeah.
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 And so,
Other than burning plastic like these idiots
other
doing
than
here, but
burning
yeah,
plastic,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
so, um, and so sometimes I think, yeah, this climate religion has got a long way to go. But when people are suddenly resorting to these lengths to keep them and their families warm this winter, not in 2030, not in 2040, but, like, you know, because all of these things would have come to a head at some point, but they're coming to a head a lot earlier than I think they would have. And so we're seeing companies break from the ranks. We're seeing, I think it was Vanguard quit some ESG alliance yesterday. I saw the news come out, and people are coming in saying, look, we have to, and there's some states, I mean, the Republican-run states that are opening these inquiries into ESG mandates in pension funds and other fiduciaries and capital allocators. And so it all just seems like it might still get worse before it gets better. That's for sure. But it just seems to me like the runway on this religion just got cut by a factor of 2 or 3. Like it went from 2 or 3 decades to like over the next 5 years, this is all going to fall apart.
Possibly. Possibly. This is once again the danger of being in our own bubble. Is like I think we realize, the stupidity of, as you said, chopping wood from, old growth and transporting it, all this sort of stuff. But I think, when people are panicking to heat themselves and all that sort of stuff, they don't really care. Like there was people like literally hands down losing their fucking jobs, and still wearing a mask. Like,
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Like, I don't have a lot of faith in, people kind of working it out. Like I think they're just gonna. I mean, the easiest scapegoats are always like big oil, or it's the Arabs or it's the Russians and all that sort of stuff. So that's what kind of tells me that we probably got a way to go. But yeah, I mean, maybe 5 years, maybe it's this decade. I don't know, but because like the young generation's dumb, and the people who technically are suffering the most, the poorer people, like over here, they don't know why. They're just like here in Macedonia, the cost of heating has doubled, and they don't know why. They're like, oh, it's the crooked politicians, and they know that much, but they don't know why. They don't know that it's like, upstream from just the local crooked politicians, that it's actually a function of, policies and propaganda and stuff from the World Economic Forum, etc. Like they don't see that far. So I don't. That's where like being on the ground here and being sort of outside of the bubble a little bit makes me think that people still are quite ignorant as to the core. I don't think a connection has been made between climate hysteria and the rising cost of heating your house, etc., etc. And I think we've got a ways to go before that is realized.
I mean, bubbles are very comfortable because
They are, yeah.
I live here in Toronto, one of the most liberal, progressive cities in the world, I think. And I like it. It's a great world-class city. And Ontario is like an advanced, super advanced, it could be a G20 nation unto itself. And, there's a lot of green sentiment here about climate and fossil fuels are bad and nuclear is bad. And we're walking around here. We have no worries this winter. We're all warm and toasty, and we have to be because this is Canada and it gets cold. But we're 60% nuclear energy in this province. And I don't think people realize that. I think if you stopped people on the street and you said, how much energy, how much electrical power do you think comes from nuclear in Ontario? They would probably, most of them say most of our energy comes from Niagara Falls. And a lot of it does, but it's not 60%. And we've got some new, if you've been following Doomberg, I think he's a great follow on Substack. I mean, he's been covering this exhaustively. We've got a nuclear reactor that's slated to shut down in 2025, I think, the Pickering reactor. And there's no plans to replace it. I mean, there was always sort of a plan to replace it, but now it's never materialized. And now there's all this animus towards fossil fuels and nuclear. So I could see Ontario being in 6 or 7 years where Germany is this winter. It's like, oh, why are we chopping down our birch trees in our front lawn to heat our houses when we used to have energy all over the place? Well, you shut down all the nuclear reactors and you won't turn them back on again. And that's why. I don't know when you get to a point where people start to figure that out. Maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't know either. I mean, I've been traveling through Europe for the last couple of months, and I must say, like, for all the perceived uh, costs and chaos and everything like that that America, etc., sort of views in Europe, too bad. Like, we were in Prague for a couple of days, and like abundance of food, like, everyone was warm, like things are still busy and pumping. Like, compared with LA, for example, I was in LA a little while back, and LA is fucking empty. It's a complete fucking dump. It's a ghost town. There's nothing going on there. Whereas the supposed catastrophe in Europe, you walk through the streets, it's not really visible. Like, Rome was fucking full. Like Positano in that area, Naples was full. We went up to the mountains in the Alps, and it was fantastic. It was beautiful. Like the food is still, relatively cheap. I mean, I will say, like, compared to 3 years ago when I was there last time, prices definitely have gone up, particularly for food. Food's probably been the biggest thing that's gone up. But like, still, accommodation wasn't too far off, where it was. Like, um, I don't know what it is about the Europeans and their resilience, but it seems like maybe they've been through a couple world wars, so they've kind of figured out how to have some sort of local microeconomies sort of functioning. Because I mean, particularly in the Alpine regions, the north of Italy, like, dude, I was so impressed. Like, the food is still cheap, still absolutely fantastic. Some of the best food I've had in my life. And they're relatively immune. Like they've got their own forestry industry, like, all that sort of stuff. So yes, things have gone up, but I think maybe the larger cities are where the bigger problems are. You know, I was in, I was in Berlin in September, and it was starting to get cold, but Berlin was as busy as I remember it, man. Like the cafes and the restaurant, everything was full. Everything was full. Like it wasn't like, it's not like the basically the Doombergs of the world sort of say it's like, oh, Europe's fucked. They're all screwed. Like it's pumping. Like and more pumping than what I've seen in while I was in America, which was interesting. But as I said, like we're only really getting into the winter now, so it'll be interesting to sort of see what things are like in the winter there. Like but I'm not going to be there to see it, so who knows.
It's interesting that how the narrative diverges from the reality, because you get that a lot. And there's a couple of different points in here. So if you're paying attention to the news reports, or even some of the bloggers or whatever, you'd think that it's like apocalypse now in certain parts of the world. And then you get there and it's like everything seems normal. I remember during the SARS outbreak in 2002 or whenever it was here in Canada or in Toronto, I'd be looking at like CNN and The Economist and all these like foreign media were talking about Toronto's a ghost town. It's like a zombie apocalypse there. It's bedlam in the streets. It's panic, and everyone's walking around like normal, like it's pumping, as you would say. It was just totally normal, and everybody was just going on their day-to-day lives. But if you would pay attention to the media reporting on it, this place was a smoking crater with a bunch of like dead bodies at the bottom of it. And then the one place you talked about, which isn't really widely reported as a disaster area, like Los Angeles, is a ghost town from an eyewitness. So you have that separation of even like the bloggers and the independent media talking about it. I mean, I've got some cousins in Berlin, and they're just going on their day-to-day lives. They have expressed some concern around energy prices. So what's happening to energy prices in Canada? They're going up here. We notice it. It's pronounced, but it's all business as usual. Life goes on.
This is why I sometimes think like, if the whole world simultaneously like I don't know, like turned off Twitter, Facebook, and the news, like I think we'd have a whole lot of peace very, 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 very quickly. Like I think a lot of the problems that we have is just, the this basically this interconnectedness that we have. And it's, I mean, it's evident all throughout history. It's like there's a good book by Douglas Murray called Madness of the Crowds.
Oh yeah, great one.
And in the yeah, and in the, I mean, he examines how, like crowds basically have a mind of their own, and they devolve. Basically, the intellect of the crowd devolves into the lowest common denominator, and you just get this sort of level, this level of madness. And what have we done with the internet and connectivity? Is we've basically created one big fucking global crowd, and all we have is noise. I mean, maybe Ted Kaczynski was right. Like, we just need the internet to collapse, chop all connections off, and maybe all of the climate hysteria, all of the fucking virus hysteria, all that sort of shit just disappears. Because like you even look at COVID, the only reason it succeeded in 2020 was that there was a level of connectivity between Twitter and Facebook that existed for the message to spread. Had that shit not been there, like, and you see, they tried it every year. They've been trying the fucking thing, since, as you said, since SARS. Like, they've been trying to create a fucking mass pandemic, mass hysteria every fucking year, and the fire just didn't catch on. It only caught on in 2020 because I think it was a mixture of people were primed and bored, like primed from the political fiasco with Trump and everything like that going on in the years preceding it, and Trump's sort of use of Twitter and popularization of Twitter, and bored because nothing really had happened. It was like everyone was just against Trump, against Trump, against Trump, and there was no other real enemy. And as soon as something supposedly deadly came out of the fucking woodwork, the hive mind of humanity, the crowd and its madness kind of exploded. And here we are today. Honestly, like I think we've had a century of moral decay in 3 years. Like, people are fucking more retarded, more dumb, more morally bankrupt, more intellectually bankrupt, more socially bankrupt, more emotionally, psychologically damaged than I remember we've ever been in my entire lifetime. And I mean, it's not like I've been alive for long, but it's a sad state of affairs. So anyway, to sort of tie that back to the other point, it's like, maybe everyone just needs a fucking digital detox, and a lot of the hysteria will just sort of die away on its own.
That's that's very on point. And it's funny how you described how like a century of moral decay happened in the last 3 years, because I always sort of looked the other direction, that the last 3 years pulled 40 years of creeping totalitarianism forward from the future. So like your observation is like we compressed, a century of past moral regression into 3 years. And I'm looking at it saying we pulled, decades of future creeping dystopia into the present. So we're kind of like sucking the worst elements of the past and the future into the present moment. And the lubricant for that is our social media. And there's a great book, I don't know if you've ever read it, Jaron Lanier, 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And it's about how I haven't. Yeah, it's a good book. There is a book, you're in your 30s, so it was before your time. It's modeled on an earlier book by a guy named Jerry Mander, which was Four Arguments for the Elimination of Television. Great book. I read it in my student days when I was, a left-wing progressive, like most students are. And but it was still a good book. It still captured that's what I was in those days. That's not what the book was. But the book did capture what television was doing to the public mind and basically dumbing it down. And so Lanier's book talks about how social media optimizes for the poorest behaviors. And the reason it does is because of it's mainly the business model, the clicks, right? The advertising. If it was a different business model than optimized for clicks, you would have a different outcome, because what creates virality more than anything else are two emotions, and those emotions are anger and fear. And that's what gets people to share more than happiness or hope or anything like that. I mean, those can go viral, but not nearly with the same frequency and degree as fear and anger do. And so you have Twitter, you have Facebook. This stuff is baked into your smartphone, so it's with you everywhere all the time.
Totally.
And then people are just doom scrolling. And what happened with me, anyway, I won't go on too much of a tangent on it, but like midway through the lockdowns, I was really at a low point with just negativity and pessimism. And I just thought, the world was going full global communist and tyranny and dystopia. And I kind of had to force myself to snap out of it. And I did. I won't go into how I did it, but the gist of it was I had to really start to self-curate what I was taking in the news and social media and that sort of thing. So I had already been off of mainstream news for years. Like, I just don't watch CNN. I don't watch CBC here in Canada. It's all state-run agitprop, really. But the social media stuff, I had to really be self-aware of the doom scrolling and the hot takes. I'm still an asshole on Twitter, and I know I'm an asshole on Twitter, and I try to be less of an asshole on Twitter. And I don't succeed as often as I'd like to. And so you kind of get caught up in the machine. And so, but I really had to make a conscious effort to say, I'm not going to obsess about the World Economic Forum controlling the world, because if I do, and I think they're going to pull it off, I'm going to descend into this pit of hopelessness. So, which actually brings me to a point I was going to ask. You said you were talking about how people, they don't see how downstream they are from these larger decisions that create these like climate inspired outcomes that make their lives miserable. How much responsibility do you think, like how much impetus is there coming out of Davos? Is it, I wrestle with the idea that they're opportunists, not drivers, but they really do a good job of making themselves look like the drivers, and maybe they are. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it is it's a tricky one. I mean, I put my entrepreneur hat on, and understanding how hard it is to herd cats and acquire customers and build a business and sort of achieve I mean, an entrepreneur is looking to achieve his own conspiracy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Good way to put it.
He's conspiring toward an end. And it's fucking hard, man. Like, it really is. So, you've got these people who I really don't think the Davos crowd is as capable, intelligent, or hardworking as the best entrepreneurs in the world. So I think they're trying to do something similar, which is they're herding cats and they're trying to direct things. For them to actually pull that off, I think it'll be quite difficult. But then again, maybe the best potential entrepreneurs, all that sort of stuff, maybe they do actually go into those environments because that's where maximum leverage exists. And I mean, I have seen powerful people do stuff and get stuff like whether it's small things like a table at the most exclusive restaurant or a room in the most exclusive hotel. You know, like money talks, and you know, power really does have a you know, it's an attractor, and it does open doors, and you know, you can influence things. There's no doubt about it. So you know, I always fall back. It reminds me of the nature nurture question. It's like, you know, what are humans, more nature or more nurture? And you know, it's always this indefinable blend of both. And I think it's the same sort of thing here. It's like they're an indefinable blend of driver and opportunist, in the sense that they are driving at someone, at something. Sorry, everyone is always driving at something. We're all conspiring, and you know, a whole lot of shit happens along the way. A bunch of it, you know, well outside of their control. But then, you know, they allocate resources towards, as you said, making it look like it was them. And you know, they try and capitalize on all sorts of, you know, opportunities. I mean, you know, when you look at stuff like, you know, the cringe that just comes out of the media, for example, you know, there's like agendas at play, but you know, at the same time, you can't just assume that because there's an agenda at play, it's why it's all happened, right? It's, you know, you need to sort of understand that things are a little bit more complex than that. While there is agendas, a lot of sort of what happens, it is quite, there is a randomness to it. Like, I mean, you know, the timeline that we're on, like the fact that you've got a, you know, fucking Asperger's autistic entrepreneur who privately bought the you know, the world's public square, while the other fucking Asperger's entrepreneur Zuckerberg, you know, his public square is falling apart and it's becoming a ghost town, you know, just full of mindless lemmings, NPCs, and zombies, with you know, with fucking Kanye West wearing a fucking gimp suit. And like, I don't know, man, like there's things happening that are just like so weird and so out of control that, you know, it's just, it's not planned, you know. It's like there is some plans, there is some conspiracies, but there's a whole lot of, you know, weird shit that happens in between, which I don't think anyone bargains for.
Yeah, my base case, my basic premise is we live in an out of control world. And we got to where we are today because our one superpower is we're super adaptable. That's our gig, and that's what we know how to do. And my eyes tend to glaze over a lot of times when I hear a lot of, like, you know, in the independent media, when something happens and the armchair geopoliticians come out and they say, well, Putin did this because he wants this, and Merkel did this because she wanted this, or whoever it is now, and Macron made this happen. I'm like, these people, they're scrambling from door to door. Like, they don't know. They're flying by the seat of their pants. They're trying to push their own agendas. A lot of those agendas conflict. Out of that mishmash, I think there's a dynamic at play that that creates its own incentive structures and kind of like starts these flywheel effects that it almost looks like, okay, there's this grand overarching conspiracy. But these flywheel effects, they're like market forces, and they tend to burn themselves out. Like, who would have thought 2-3 years ago, who would have thought that we'd be sitting here talking about Facebook being a ghost town? But it is. Yeah. You know, I log into Facebook and it's like tumbleweeds blowing through the place. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I haven't missed anything in this since the 6 months ago when I logged in. And who would have thought that was even possible? I mean, just like the same time, there was a time when Yahoo seemed like Google is now. And you would think, you know, they're the 800-pound gorilla for the rest of the internet era, and they weren't. So that's why, I mean, that kind of brings me back to why I think sometimes that this whole climate hysteria is closer to the end than it is the beginning or even the midpoint. Maybe. And why I think, you know, the World Economic Forum, I mean, Klaus Schwab has been on about the fourth industrial revolution and the Great Reset for 40 years. Like, he reminds me of this. I won't say their name because I don't want to slag them, but there was this Canadian band that was around for like 25 years, like, and they just like, they just went nowhere. And then they finally had a hit like 20 years in. It's like, oh, they got a hit, and that was like a lot of factor grants and a lot of government subsidies. And it was like, if you shovel enough money into a mediocre band for a couple of decades, they'll come up with a hit. That's almost what it feels like the World Economic Forum did. I mean, yes, they're always influential and there was a prestigious forum there, but he's been rattling on about this same, jam for 40 years. And then COVID hit and it was like, this is our moment. And they just stepped into it. They leaned into it and they kind of hit it out of the ballpark. When every world leader comes out of Davos chanting "Build Back Better" like a zombie, then you kind of look like you're a James Bond level villain controlling an organization like Spectre that's everywhere.
Yeah,
penetrating the world's governments.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the one thing, and I've said this in the book, The Uncommunist Manifesto, is like that. What we're all fighting in many ways is entropy, and we're all fighting a losing battle. Because as much as whether it's Facebook or Google or any of these, like World Economic Forum, the United States government, like I've been on a major history binge this year, and like the ancient Macedonians, the Romans, the Huns, the Mongols, all of them, like the greatest powers, have all succumb to entropy, and sort of the human emotional form of entropy is probably boredom. And that there comes a point where hysterics just becomes boring, and you can only freak people out so much that it's sort of like the apathy sort of sets in, and no one really gives a fuck anymore. And that's, as you said, that's exactly what's happened with Facebook. And maybe to a large degree it's like all the social justice warriors just kind of get tired in the next couple of years of like banging the drum of fighting the good fight, and then maybe that chutzpah, that oomph that the World Economic Forum and these people sort of had kind of like fizzles out. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. It's I actually don't, in many ways I don't envy the task they've set out to accomplish, because they need like never-ending resources to do it, and they're sort of running out of time and running out of resources with which to do it.
Yes. I mean, I'll come back. I'll put a pin in that point. But I will say I agree with what you were talking about, that this sort of never-ending outrage will kind of fizzle itself out, like just outrage as a culture. But I have incorrectly called the top in peak outrage for about like 5 years now. Right? I mean, I wrote a book on how to defend yourself from deplatform attacks and cancel culture. And I won't say when it came out. I'll first say I almost didn't release the book because I thought like this is all in the rearview mirror. I thought I missed the top. Cancel culture used to be a thing and it kind of fizzled out, and now it's no longer a thing. And so I almost didn't put the book out. Well, it was in like February 2020, I put the book out finally, thinking, I wrote it, I might as well put it out. And then COVID hit, and then all of like the cancel culture and deplatform just went into the stratosphere. So I've called the top incorrectly too many times, but it's sort of like, it can't go up forever, can it? I mean, I think Bitcoin's the only thing that can go up forever, but cancel culture surely can't. But what was the point I said I wanted to? I was joking about the Bitcoin, by the way, but what was the point I wanted to come back to? They're going to run out of resources. Yes.
Yeah.
So because of this, because the COVID crisis pulled so much future imbalance into the present. I actually think that if there was an agenda, if there was a creeping agenda, a plan to enslave the entire world in a technocratic dystopia with the social credit system and central bank digital currencies, I think they've added so much imbalance to the system that the system is going to give out before they can actually implement something like that. And I say that frequently, like in the newsletter and stuff, like central bank digital currencies, there's this quickening drumbeat to get those out, but nobody's really ready with anything, because I think all of this, the global financial system, the bond bubble, the credit bubble, inflation, this is all coming to a head so quickly that I really don't think that even if there was an agenda, like a WEF-inspired technocracy, or even just like governments wanting to go China-style social credit, I don't think they're going to have these systems ready in time, even if they had the will to try and ram them through.
Yeah, I mean, it's a, as we said at the outset, right? These are all big undertakings, and like, having run businesses before, trying to bring all of that together, in a timely fashion, uh, in a way that works, and the sort of the iterations that are required along the way to make sure that it works. It's a fucking big project. It's a big deal. And it's
Yeah.
not as easy as, like, just coming up with the idea and then voila, it's done. It's a way bigger mission than that.
I mean, you talk about herding cats. Look at China, where they probably is the one country in the world outside of North Korea that they have absolute domination over the public and private will. Like what the government says goes in China. 100%,
Mhm.
no leeway. Look at the problems they're having trying to keep the system together, trying to keep people in compliance, which is actually getting a little looser every day. Look at, with 100% top-down centralized power in China, how much trouble they're having implementing that kind of a system. And you're telling me that even if the WEF and the G20 governments and the finance ministers and the central banks all got together and said, this is how it's going to go, that's how it's going to go, I really don't see it happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great example of, like, the difficulty of executing on a conspiracy. It's one thing to conspire; it's another thing to execute on a conspiracy.
Right.
And that's a much harder thing to do. And that's why in business, like, for example, when you're running a business, it's like, I always say, anyone who's got an idea, like, everyone's got a fucking idea, right? It's very few can actually execute on the idea, and that's what really separates people. It's the execution capacity, and that's so rare, man. It's so fucking rare. It's not even funny. And
That's the precious
more often than
commodity. Yeah.
it is, and more often than not, the process of execution, um, like, it's kind of like, it reminds me of, the whole Schrodinger's, is it Schrodinger or whatever it is, but, or the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? It's like, you know, you don't know if something is a wave or a piece of matter, until you actually look at it. Or wait,
Yeah,
that
that's
could be, I might
Schrodinger's
be
cat.
confusing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Schrodinger's thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, sorry, is like, you don't know if something is there, or you don't know the location or the energy status or something, until you actually look at it, um, or whatever. So anyway,
The Heisenberg uncertainty was you can know the trajectory and momentum of a particle or the
uh-huh,
location. You can't know
or the
them both,
location. That's it.
which
Yeah,
which makes
exactly.
sense because you're dealing at such finite scale, right? That it's like, okay, I want to know where it is, but then you don't know what direction it's going because you're looking at that one point in time. But if you want to know the speed and the direction it's going, then you can't know where it is. You only know the
Hmm.
direction and the speed. And then the Schrodinger's thing was like the thought experiment was it comes down to wave particle duality, right? The cat is both alive and dead until you look at it. and the quantum state collapses.
So yeah, so the thinking there is that as soon as you have the system there, and then as soon as you apply intent or action towards the system, you actually change the status of the system such that it's something else. So that way, your very attempt at executing the conspiracy changes the board game in such a way that your initial intent needs to also adapt and change. And it's sort of like you influence the thing that you wish to conspire in such a way that your conspiracy must also adapt as well. And that's the tricky thing about executing anything, is that the shit changes. It's dynamic. It reminds me of I read a fantastic book by a guy called Oswald Spengler, who was he was a early 1900s philosopher, genius guy, and he talks about like the levels of life, and he says, I'm going to paraphrase here because it's been a while since I read the book, but you've kind of got like base life, which is the plants and shit like that, and the plants are basically effectively like victims and receivers. They don't go out and they don't hunt food or anything like that. They just get the sunshine, they get the rain, like it's whatever comes to them, right? And then you sort of have the next level of life, which is the herbivores. And the herbivores, the way they feed and subsist is they go and get plants. Now the plants, I mean, you could say have some sort of defense mechanisms, bitter, poison, whatever, but by and large the plant doesn't fight back when the herbivore is acquiring it. But then you have what he calls like the highest form of being, the most moral creature, is the carnivore. And the carnivore is moral because its prey is dynamic. Its prey actually does fight back. It runs. It has tusks or whatever. Like it's looking to defend itself, and that's what makes the carnivore, a more moral creature. And then he points at humans as being the apex, is because we actually not only hunt herbivores, but we also hunt carnivores as well. So it's you're playing with a dynamic prey, and when you look at, if you sort of take that lens and apply it to the world and conspiracies, it's like you have this dynamic prey, like the thing you're trying to conspire to evolve or move in a particular direction changes as you do it, and you really have to be a powerful hunter, with all of the best reflexes and instincts and everything like that in order to do that well. And I guess the question is, is are these institutions like the WEF, etc., prime or capable at that level to do that? And this is where I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that dynamic is self-reinforcing at all levels. So I mean, there's this concept from a book, a classic sort of satire book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. I don't know.
Fantastic book. Fantastic book. I love that series.
His concept of the recip river exclusion, right? The number whose value can be anything but itself, right? So it's the given, that was like the heart of the improbability drive, but just the idea of a value that excludes itself is how I look at these ideas of like all-encompassing conspiracies or predictions of the future, really. And I even take it to the level of, whatever the consensus view of the future is the one path that can't occur. Like it's never going to happen because there's too much consensus invested in that happening, right? Like there was a TV series many years ago called Flash Forward. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but the premise was everyone on humanity, an event happened and everyone in humanity like sort of blacked out for a few seconds, and they saw where they were going to be like 18 months in the future. And as I was watching this series, it occurred to me that future that everyone saw would actually be the one future that would be impossible to occur because there was too much foreknowledge of it. So all the actors, enough actors would be taking action with that foreknowledge that would preclude that from ever happening. So, and that same dynamic is what makes a conspiracy impossible.
Yeah.
Hold your thought.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my idea there, is that no amount of foreknowledge or even power really can force a conspiracy about the future through, because like you said, we're all conspiring. So it's got to compete with everybody else's conspiracy, and no one is ever going to get 100% domination.
Totally. I mean, I'm reading a book on Alexander the Great at the moment again, and man, this guy, honestly, if there was anyone who deserves the title of the great, it's this motherfucker. Like the things he was able to accomplish. But even in the end, after the most incredible sort of level of conquest ever known to man, there ended up being competing conspiracies in his own under his domain, and they ended up poisoning him and killing him, and he was the greatest of the great, with people who genuinely, like, I mean, he would fucking be the first one across the bridge and over the wall, and his soldiers and generals would be fucking clamoring over each other to fucking go and fight next to him. Like, that was the level of dedication. Like, it's not like what happens today with leaders. Like, nobody's gonna go take a fucking bullet for Joe Biden, man. Like, it ain't gonna fucking happen, bro.
And he's not going to be clamoring over a wall first in a shooting war because he can't even ride a bike. But yeah,
correct. He ain't fucking clamoring over anything. And the thing is, in that environment, competing conspiracies emerge. Let alone the environment of moral decay that we live in today. So it's like, this is where, I don't often buy into conspiracy theories, but I will say there is definitely room to make educated guesses on the direction things are going, which don't necessarily have to arrive there by virtue of a conspiracy theory. They just arrive there by virtue of looking at the science, right? It's like, hey, there's clouds above. I can smell moisture in the air. It's probably going to rain. Doesn't mean it's a fucking conspiracy. It's
I
just
put more stock into dynamics than conspiracies, right? Like,
totally,
there's this period, we're in an environment where it pays to be woke, it pays to be socialist, it pays to be a climate hysteric. The system is optimized for that right now, and if you align with that direction, you will experience outsized rewards, right? So it's just kind of the whole, like, this is just the way the system is hardwired at the moment, but it won't always be, right? I'm reading a biography of Napoleon right now, and what struck me about his life was that, I mean, he was always calculating and Machiavellian, to pick another figure, but he kind of, like, it's not like he stumbled into that position, but he wasn't ordained to be the emperor of the world. He just kind of saw this vacuum and walked into it. And the other part of that strikes me is that he made such an indelible mark on history, and it was 14 years was the length of his reign. That's not a huge amount of time, really, from beginning to end. And that was even after he came back from exile the first time. So that's actually, I look at people who are like, well, Klaus Schwab runs the world, and I don't think he does. He strikes me more as a guy who's sort of like pushed his organization into a vacuum. And
Yes.
even their reign won't last forever. But then the other side of me, but the devil's advocate side of me says, yes, but Stalin, Bolshevism lasted 80 years in the Soviet Union. So it may not be permanent, but if it lasts 80 years, and that can overlay a huge chunk of your life, if not all of it. So it's no comfort that it's not permanent if you're in the middle of that. So
Totally.
yeah.
That's the tricky thing. It's like our lives are too short for these, these mega political shifts to matter. Like, yeah, because a lot of them do take multiple generations to sort of filter through civilization, and we have to live through a series of stupid seasons in order to be proven right or wrong in the end.
I have a theory yet unproven that it's a hope, I guess, more than a theory, that because of the technology cycle now is compressing everything, that if all my worst fears were realized and the developed world descended into global technocratic Marxism, it wouldn't last 80 years, right? The system would come unglued a lot faster than 80 years, maybe 20 tops, maybe more, like, who knows? It could be coming unglued right now as we speak, but it would just, because of technology, the interconnectedness, the accelerated speed of effects through the economy and the system, that these cycles would happen faster.
I mean, you would think so. You would think so. I mean, to tie that back to what we were talking about earlier, it's this is the thing about technology, right? It's that it's an amplifier. So in many ways, it is the very thing that puts us at risk of a technocratic Marxism, but it's the very thing that may also inhibit technocratic Marxism to stand the test of time. You know what I mean? So it's the thing that opens the door to the devil is the same thing that kind of squashes the devil in the door in a way.
Yeah, because I think it was Huxley who said, if we ever descend into a technocratic dictatorship, we'll never be able to get out of it. And I don't believe it, actually, because I think what we know in retrospect about central planning just not working. And I think today the drop-in replacement for central planning, the elixir, is artificial intelligence, with air quotes around it, because I really don't believe in AI. I call it algorithmic imitation is all it is. It's just not going to be capable of running the economy. And so I actually think, were it to happen, to your point, it would create the very conditions that bring about its undoing by bringing them into existence.
Yeah, one can only hope that we're not caught in the crosshairs for too long a period. That's going to be the challenging part. I mean, it's weird. Sometimes, I mean, and I'm obviously a little bit younger than you, so my life circumstances are a little bit different. But I'm kind of getting to the point where I do want to settle down, have a family, and all that sort of stuff. So if you asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like, "Fuck yes, bring on the end, fucking let everything collapse, fucking it's time for retribution and all that sort of shit." Because in many ways we get used to the comforts that we have, and the absence of those comforts, may be the antidote to the moral decay that we've sort of had. That's part of what might bring us out of it. But then, as I said, like now that I'm getting a little bit older and getting into a different stage in life, now I'm like, fucking, I don't really feel like fighting zombies and shit like that, because I want to just fucking enjoy the balance of my life. So yeah, it's tricky.
And you feel like that now. Wait till you're married and have a kid, right? You're really not going to want the zombie apocalypse to hit once you have a child in your life. And politicians know this. Like, politicians will play on this, that like people want to keep their families safe. So tell them what's going to keep their families safe, and they'll do whatever you want them to do that. I think where people now, and increasingly higher numbers, where people are getting orange pilled and losing faith in the institutions and questioning the very legitimacy of these governments and especially the mainstream media, I think is just one too many examples of we put our faith in these institutions and these powers that be, so to speak, to look after the interests of my family and my well-being, and they didn't come through every single time. They just served themselves. And so now, in order to look after my family and to provide for my children, I have to take things into my own hands now. I have to do it myself. I can't rely on the savior state, as my friend Charles Hugh Smith always called it. They're not there anymore. So they may be in the past, but that's going away.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a fundamental erosion in people's. I mean, it's weird. There's a simultaneous erosion in that, but as you said, like there's a in the vacuum that's being left in the erosion of traditional institutions, like these new globalist type institutions are trying to fill that vacuum, the WEF, etc. And but the same, they're going to suffer the same fate. The question is what replaces the vacuum of the WEF and everything like that, and that's a trickier question. My guess is it's actually probably like the archetype of wealthy Bitcoiners or something like that. It's like this sort of new entrepreneurial rich, and this is where it really matters to have a rooting in sort of morality and ethics, not just utilitarianism, which is that's where I don't like the people like Elon Musk and all that sort of stuff much, because for them it's morality is a function of utility, whereas I think that's fundamentally flawed, and it's why the medieval times, for example, whether you look at the West, or even an area that I have huge respect for is the Japanese East, not the Chinese East, but the Japanese East, with Bushido, and in the West it was chivalry. Like the values and virtues that emerged out of both of those was something that kept stability in society in times of great turmoil and war and dispute and everything like that. It was times of great upheaval, but those sort of moral virtues came first. It wasn't utilitarian. In fact, the knights of the West and the samurai of the East, they would look down on people who made everything about utility, which is why the merchants were a lower class than this sort of warrior class. So I think about that a lot, because today, the sort of there is no warrior code, there is no more Bushido or chivalry. It's kind of like much of that is dead today. And I'm actually writing a book for with Bitcoin Magazine. They're gonna be the publisher, but it's called The Bushido of Bitcoin, and it's basically an examination of the 10 or 11 traits that Bitcoiners who are likely going to inherit the world, what they're going to need to embody, lest they become basically the new, basically parasitic elite class, because we are going to have a disproportionate amount of the world's wealth in the coming, I don't know, decades or century, and there's a lot of fucking dumb kids in Bitcoin. Honestly, there's a lot of dumb kids, there's a lot of fucking morons, that there needs to be some sort of moral rooting, and a revival of a kind of code of ethics. So anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
no, that's fine, and I'm not going to keep you much longer. I will ask you, I'll get you coordinates and stuff like that. You can mention the Uncommunist Manifesto, but are you in a position to run down those 10 moral attributes now, or is that something you want to save for when the Bitcoin Magazine book comes out?
let's do another show when we talk about that. Yeah, the Bushido of Bitcoin. We'll do a whole show about that because I think
Okay.
that's yeah, it's
Yeah.
something I'm doing a lot of thinking on.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So then, in that case, why don't tell us a little bit? I mean, I hope by now everyone listening has gotten read the Uncommunist Manifesto. You co-wrote that with Mark Moss. You run the Bitcoin Times magazine. Just tell us how we can keep in touch with you and what comes next. Well, you just told us what comes next, but
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, to what you said, if anyone hasn't got the Uncommunist Manifesto yet, I think if they pick it up, depending on when this episode goes live, I think Amazon's still shipping out pretty quickly, and they'll have it for Christmas if they order it pretty quick. Um, just search Uncommunist Manifesto on Amazon. And then, yeah, the my sort of pride and joy at the moment is a publication called the Bitcoin Times, which I do annually. It's a collection of 6 to 7 essays from who I think are the best thinkers in and around Bitcoin in the world. So I pick a theme for the year, and we write about the theme through a lens of Bitcoin and about Bitcoin through the lens of the theme. So this year it's called the Austrian edition. So we're looking at Bitcoin through through the lens of the Austrian School of Economics, and inverted the Austrian School of Economics through the lens of Bitcoin. And I've got Seyfedin, I've got Michael Goldstein, who's one of the greatest minds in Bitcoin, probably influenced more people to get into Bitcoin than anyone else. Pierre Rochard, Raheem Tagizadagan, who's actually a student of Hans Hermann Hoppe, direct student of him, and he's the last Austrian economist to be teaching in the direct Austrian tradition in Austria. The guy's an absolute wealth of knowledge. So he wrote a piece for it, and Konrad Graf, who's one of the great modern Austrian economists. And Parker Lewis actually wrote a piece in there as well. He wrote the introduction, which is his own sort of insight into Bitcoin's relationship with Austrian economics. So that's sort of this year. Last year was a bit more of a sci-fi kind of future-oriented one. Edition 3 was the Promethean edition, which was a blend of really cool writers. So Jeff Booth, Jimmy Song, Eric Kaysen, things like that. So anyway, the long story short is it's an annual publication, and I do a collectible print of it. And the collectible print means that there's 2,100 of each edition, and they're each uniquely numbered. And yeah, people can buy that on bitcointimes.io. It's only available for sats in Bitcoin. And I think if they use your code, which was, I can't remember, was it Bomb Thrower?
Yeah, it's Bomb Thrower. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if they use that code, you get 21,000 sats off the price.
Nice touch. Okay, great. And where are you on Twitter? I don't know how active you are on that.
Yeah, I'm kind of active. I'm trying to be less active, honestly. So I think I'm going to delete the app from my phone and just focus on just doing a couple threads per week. Like last week, actually a couple days ago, I did a thread about privacy, anonymity, and I tagged Jordan Peterson, who it actually caught his attention. So he retweeted it. Saying, because his position on anonymity, I think, is a little bit stupid and naive.
Right.
So yeah, he's got boomeritis in that sense. Like he just thinks that we need to somehow separate the anons from the real people. But it's it's fine to say it in theory, but in practice, the process of doing that actually brings about the stuff that he's warning about with digital IDs, etc. So, he hasn't thought about it too well. So I kind of wrote a thread to illuminate that, and it went viral. So I try and do threads that are helpful, and try and examine nuance around difficult topics. So if anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, there's that. Plus I do a bunch of shit posting, but as I said, I'm going to try and limit the shit posting next year and focus more on the threads.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the same. And your handle looks to be Svetski Writes on Twitter, right?
Yes, Svetski Writes. Yes, it's WRITES, like writing.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
Alex, it's been great. I appreciate this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, man.